to Tom and Tina and let them get started.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Tom. Today, Tina and I are going to share with you our 2023 10-week trip to Duluth, up the north shore of Lake Superior, to the Apostle Islands National Lake Shore in Wisconsin, on to Pictured Rocks National Lake Shore to Sault Ste. Marie in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, then down the eastern shore of Lake Michigan. It's a beautiful part of our country, and summer is a wonderful time to visit, as the heat is moderated by the cool waters of the Great Lakes. Now, we work from a schedule because if we didn't, we could probably talk for an hour on every slide, so that would not work out. But you can see this circle route that we made there.
We would love to visit all the lighthouses around the lake, but as this map of Lake Michigan shows, there are 105 on Lake Michigan alone, but we will share just some of our favorites. And as you see these little circles, those are all lighthouses along the lake. So there are many to see. It is 600 miles from Kansas City to Duluth, Minnesota. That's the same from Kansas City to Denver, Colorado. And Duluth is where we started out. When one thinks of Minnesota, one thinks of lakes, and our first campground was a lovely small pond, and this is the early morning fog. The campground gave us the use of free paddle boats and canoes, and we took advantage of this lovely common loon who was floating by so we could get a great picture. And then we took some more. Here was one of her chicks, and she was, they were both fishing, and some of the fish was jumping up in the air. When we visited Duluth this last time, we had not visited Glen Sheen. It's a 39-room estate of the Condon family, and it's now operated by the University of Minnesota, and it's open for tours. It's fascinating and beautiful. And the walk through the gardens along Lake Superior, which you can see the blue in the background, was really quite pleasant. And Duluth is a major port. It handles large freighters that cross the Great Lakes. And to accommodate the entrance into the harbor, the bridge will lift up. It's fun to watch, but it's not so much fun if you're stuck on the other side waiting.
The entrance to the harbor has 2 lighthouses that can be walked out to and enjoyed. Duluth has grown considerably since the first time I visited there 65 years ago with my parents. It was just a small fishing village at the time. Now you can see it's quite a large city. Now, running 154 miles along the lake shore to the Canadian border, the North Shore Drive has along it 6 state parks, multiple waterfalls, lovely small villages and towns, and one of the most iconic lighthouses in the Great Lakes, Split Rock Lighthouse.
We have traveled this route before and visited most of the parks in the falls, but we never stopped at Split Rock before, and it was a fun climb up to the top. All of these buildings are open for tours, and they're quite interesting. There was more than one lighthouse keeper. There were several. There's school up there and so forth. And the view of the lake from the lighthouse is absolutely spectacular. And look how clear the water is. It's one of the clearest waters that there is.
At the far end of the North Shore is Grand Portage National Monument. Grand Portage National Monument is the site of the British Northwest Trading Company, where French voyageurs who transported goods and furs from Montreal through the Great Lakes in canoes and back. They would trek from this spot 8.5 miles to Fort Charlotte with 180-pound packs on their backs and shoulders for trade with the Ojibwa tribe, who still live in the area. Here's an Ojibwa shelter typical of the early 1800s. Local tribal members explain traditional life at that time and work as reenactors in the reconstructed fort.
And a reenactor was busy building a large birch bark canoe in the shed. And of course, I always have to get my hands on things. So I asked him if I could help out, and he let me lace up the birch bark to the frame of the tree bark fiber. It was really fun, and he had to get it in these little holes and wind it around. Inside the fort's main building was the cook, and he was entertaining us with a squeeze box, and he was really quite good at it. And of course, the manager had all the latest conveniences. The National Monument is quite interesting, and one can take that 8.5-mile Voyager Trail if you have time and energy.
Just 100 yards or so north of the fort is the current Canadian border, where the highest waterfall in Minnesota, Border Falls, is located. A few miles south of the border is Judge Magny State Park, where a nice 2-mile trail leads to 2 waterfalls. This one where Tina cooled her toes and Kate, our dog, dreamed of a less strenuous activity. And further on, Devil's Cauldron, a unique double waterfall. One of the falls goes into an opening in the rock. They've done dye tests to try and determine where it emerges, but they've never been able to find the place on Lake Superior, so it's a bit of a mystery.
And we stayed at Lamb's Resort. It's a campground on the shore of Lake Superior. And there's about a mile of shoreline, which is fun to walk in the morning with our dog. And we take a trail up to the Temperance River, and we found a wonderful bakery. So that was certainly a great way to start the day. And sunrise is a favorite time to hike, and Lake Superior was wonderfully calm while we were there. The next morning in the water, it was a little rougher, and this is a common merganser. We're birders, so we really enjoy watching birds. And this was a whole flock with some of the babies, so the adults were teaching the youngsters how to dive into the waves, and it was interesting because they were all visible, and then they'd all do the arch and they'd go down again and hunt for fish. And this is a cedar waxwing.
Now, about a half-mile from the campground is the Temperance River State Park. It has a beautiful hiking trail that goes up the river gorge to the Superior Hiking Trail, also known as the SHT. This trail goes all the way from Duluth to the Canadian border and has multiple waterfalls as one goes up. And at the top is this waterfall. We decided to hike a little bit further and perhaps do a little bit of the SHT. So I carefully checked out the trail map.
We hadn't gone over 100 yards, and with a swarm of mosquitoes when we came across this very fresh black bear scat. We prudently decided to return to the top of the falls instead of trekking on this area because of too many mosquitoes. So we found a great breezy place to have lunch. And all through the rocks were beautiful flowers, all smaller than my fingernail, gorgeous but tiny. Later on, returning to the trailhead, we came across a group of young women, this was so fun, who were backpacking the Superior Hiking Trail for 1 week. And we were really happy to find out that one of them was actually from Kansas City. And later on that day, we saw them in a very protected area swimming near the entrance of Lake Superior.
Well, it was time to move on. Our next stop was a campground in Bayfield, Wisconsin, Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. Lots of beautiful old homes in Bayfield. This one is now a B&B. Our campground had unique cabins as well as trailer sites. This cabin was built like a sailing ship and was on the edge of the camp swimming pond. Now, normally in a campground, they have pools, but in Minnesota, you'll find ponds. No need for a pool when you've got natural water all around. We visited the Apostle Islands previously, and as the name suggests, it's made up mostly of several islands. So this time, instead of the islands, we plan to explore sites along the shore that we hadn't seen before. Not far from Bayfield is Frog Creek, the first Native American National Tribal Park. I didn't know there was such a thing as a Native American park. So we plan to explore these sites, and we found that our philosophy of hiking would follow very much the Ojibwa philosophy, that the forest was quite sacred. After a short hike through thick woods, we came to a small but lovely beach on the shore of Lake Superior, where Kate and I rested.
And I got busy arranging debris from the forest floor and beach, and I made a Frog Creek Park princess. A few miles down the road, still in the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, is the town of Cornucopia. The town has always been a fishing village, even though the fleet is now modern, made up of pleasure crafts and sports fishermen, as well as commercial fishing boats. And Cornucopia has a fish market where one can buy very freshly caught smoked herring, which I have learned to love. So I treated Tom to a fish dinner at a picnic table on the beach. And this was so much fun to watch this little girl. This was at the old Coast Guard station, and she was like 4 years old, and she was having so much fun in the sand and the lake. And then she started digging like a turtle, and all that sand was just thrown behind her. It was really quite entertaining. And Kate, our dog, doesn't particularly enjoy water, and she has been known to fall off the boat in the ocean in Alaska, where my son lives. So we were giving her a quick lesson on how to use a life ring in case she should fall off.
Near Cornucopia is the Siskiwit River Preserve. Pretty private, not many people even know it's there. It's a series of gentle waterfalls along a river that empties into Lake Superior. It's quite beautiful and peaceful. The only other person there was a young man sitting along the edge, quietly playing his guitar. To the music, we enjoyed the beautiful patterns made by the flowing water in the creek bed. From Bayfield, we moved on to Munising, Michigan, and a nicely treated campground near Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. You can see how we travel. Since we're gone several months at a time, we spend most of our time outdoors, but sleep and cook and eat inside the trailer. An excursion boat, Pictured Rocks stretches about 40 miles along the lakeshore of Lake Superior and gets its name from these beautiful mineral-colored rocks along the lakeshore. An excursion boat or kayaks will take one along the shoreline to see these beautiful formations, as you can't really see them well from the land.
There are several impressive waterfalls in the park, including this one in Munising Falls. It can be reached by a short trail and lots of steps to a viewing platform. And then here we have many more lovely blooms along the pathway. This is Miners Rock. It's another iconic site in the park that can be easily seen from walking throughout the park or by kayak. And here is my cousin Amy and her 13-year-old son Martin, who are from the Boston area. They joined us for like 7 days, and we had fun exploring together. And we all wanted to kayak to see the mineral site, but the wind and the waves were too high, so we were limited to just kayaking Grand Island. And we did get to see some mini sea caves that the water makes these indentations. And this is a great view of Grand Island Lighthouse.
While Tina and family were out kayaking, I stayed with Kate on shore and found a fish house to treat ourselves and our guests with smoked whitefish back in camp. The first thing Martin, age 13, did was pop the eyeballs in his mouth and start chewing. Yeah, that's what I thought too. He said they were very salty and chewy. I'll take him at his word. Then we finished off the evening with a rousing game of Scrabble in the trailer dinette. Next day, we hiked along the lake shore to Au Lighthouse. This area is known as the Graveyard Coast, as there were 5 shipwrecks just along this short stretch of beach. Remains of the wrecks can still be seen along the beach with these timbers, and in spikes that poke up through the sand. You have to kind of watch your footing. It's easy to step on or trip on these things.
And then the only way to access the lighthouse, because we went down to the beach, was by climbing this rickety log and chain ladder. So that was an adventure all in itself. And it was worth the effort to climb up to All Sable Lighthouse. All the buildings are open, of course, and they're furnished. And we did return by an easier trail along a Forest Service road. And the one thing that you generally do not want to see are black bears while you're hiking. There are many bears in the Upper Peninsula. This is Oswald Bear Ranch. It's a little corny, but we did it because of our 13-year-old cousin. And it's not uncommon for mother bears to get killed, unfortunately, on the road. And so then here are these babies that are left, which would die. So this man has a tremendous amount of property, and then he built this whole area for these babies, and then they have to remain there, of course, because they could not live on their own. So it was fun to view all these creatures. And then to have an opportunity to feed these young bears in a very controlled environment.
People who live in the Upper Peninsula are known as Youpers. This was once an area where there were a lot of mines, and many of the miners were Welsh, and they were used to taking pasties or meat sandwiches down into the mines. These baked meat pies are wonderfully tasty and make a great meal for a visiting Youper also. Well, it was time to move 40 miles east along the lakeshore to the town of Grand Marais. The beach here at the City Park Campground gives a nice view of the dunes there in the distance that are actually part of Pictured Rocks. The campground at Grand Marais City Park sits on a dune about 50 feet above the lake, and even provides a nice archway if you plan to have a wedding or another celebration. But most people who live here collect the beautiful rocks found on the shoreline. We were no exception. We seldom, if ever, buy souvenirs. We collect rocks for our garden at home. I think I brought home around 300 pounds of rocks this year.
The city campground is really great fun, and all the campers are pleasant, and we had so much fun with these kids because they knew we were taking pictures, so they'd zoom around this big park and they would smile and wave, and I'm sure that was last year, I'm sure they've grown quite a bit since then. And then we'd take like 40 steps down to the lake, and we were all collecting rocks and just enjoying the wonderful breeze. And sunrise was a great time to exercise your dog, or have a little bit of sunrise yoga to the sound of the waves. And then Grand Marais has a very simple lighthouse, as you can see here. And where there's a lighthouse, you'll find us trying to get a good sunset picture, and you can see that in the distance. It's there, but it's tiny.
Now in Missouri, we're blessed with a lot of state parks. Not very far from Grand Marais is Tequamanon Falls State Park. This lovely park has several waterfalls. The upper falls are not quite like Niagara, but it's beautiful. The brown in the water is from tannins that come from fallen vegetation in the river. This river was once used to bring logs to a mill from the forest. You can imagine thousands of logs falling over that waterfall. Must have been quite a sight.
And it was fun to see the people because they would go in the falls and disappear. And then you'd see their hand, come out. It was just, they were having a lot of fun playing. And after a long hike around the falls, Kate and I found a great spot to take a brief nap, but Kate, she kept watch. And wading in the cool river was a great way to awaken and cool down. It felt great on my feet. And watching the patterns as the water went over the rocks was really quite beautiful. And a bit further, we enjoyed watching the youngsters sliding and playing hide and seek in the falls. In our return back to camp, we saw a sign that said Seney National Wildlife Refuge. This wasn't exactly the time to see migrating birds, but we did enjoy it and see these tundra swans. This was amazing. These two loons are the oldest nesting loons in the world. They have been together 34 years, more than most people, and they come back every year and they nest here. And right about sunset, we came upon this pond where there were several white egrets looking for a meal.
After several days in Grand Marais, it was time to move on to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, a place where Lake Huron joins Lake Superior through the St. Mary's River. From our campsite in another city park along the river, we could watch these freighters passing by. This one was about 100 yards long, but it was one of the smallest ones. Canada can be seen on the opposite shore of the river. Now, this freighter was over 3 football fields in length, over 1,000 feet.
I absolutely loved watching these freighters. It was just so much fun. And we were at a city park right there at the waterway. And it was really very subtle, but you could feel them in your body. Even when you were sound asleep, it wasn't really clear what was going on, but I knew something was going on. So I would grab the camera and run outside in my pajamas and take these photos. And what was interesting, you could get the name off of it, go to a website, the other campers told us, and then you can find out what they were carrying, when they were built, you know, where they were going, how long they were. It was really fascinating. And then another way to see the Great Lakes is by a passenger ship. They sail from Montreal, Canada to Duluth, Minnesota. And in the town of Sault Ste. Marie is a retired freighter. This is a must-see. It's called the Valley Camp, and it's been turned into a fascinating museum. It's possible to take a self-guided tour, seeing many exhibits, as well as visiting the crew quarters, engine rooms where the coal was. It was an amazing ship. And here on display is one of the lifeboats from the Edmund Fitzgerald, which was torn off the ship and later found on the beach. I was fascinated by this story, and it was a terrible disaster. In this museum, there was another fabulous film, very well done, about a freighter named the Bradley that was lost in the storm, and only 2 men survived this gigantic ship. And they were floating on debris for several days before they were found in this very cold water.
And as we were looking around, I thought this chain would be a great one to use to secure our bicycles. Tina enjoyed playing the part of sailor for a while, relaxing in crew quarters. Well, I enjoyed just learning about how the ship worked and about the cargo that was carried under these many hatches that can be seen out the porthole.
And then one morning, you know, it was like this subtle vibration that was going on. It awakened me in the middle of the night. And I went out, of course, again, and I thought, what in the world is going on? Why are they so close to this freighter? It was a bass fishing tournament. And boy, when that horn blew, they were gone.
The following day, we drove out to Whitefish Point to visit the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. I would also call this a must-visit thing in the area. They call this area the graveyard of the Great Lakes, as along with the Edmund Fitzgerald, over 500 ships are known to have sunk during storms in the area. The museum contains the ship's bell from the Edmund Fitzgerald, the only artifact removed when the wreck was discovered. The area where the ship went down is now a no-dive area, off limits and preserved as a memorial to those sailors who lost their lives.
And every year they take this bell out and they have a ceremony, and their descendants then call their names out who died on this ship. And after a ship is lost, volunteers will come out and comb the beaches to try to recover the victims. And sometimes the only way they could identify a person was by their jewelry. There's locket here, and then you can see some earrings. And then along the museum is Whitefish Point Lighthouse, which is of course open for tour. And the lightkeeper's home had the latest convenience, like this clothes dryer and the latest digital music. At least one had to use their digits to make it work. And this is the version of the iPhone.
We then walked out to Whitefish Point. It's a protected area. They close it down most of the year for plovers who, this is the only place in the world where they nest. And the beach had just been opened the day before, so it was pretty quiet and deserted. Kate and Tina found a very comfortable log on which to take a rest. Well, I nested down in the rocks by the shore where the cool spray was very comfortable. On the way back into Sault Ste. Marie, we stopped to explore the Iroquois Point Lighthouse. It was sitting right on the lake. One thing about taking pictures of lighthouses is you often can't see the lake behind, which adds very much to their beauty. We also explored the Soo Locks, which allow those big freighters to pass very shallow rapids in the river. And we went to the Pendles Creek National Fish Hatchery, where the director explained how they're trying to restore populations of lake trout that have been decimated by sea lampreys. Unfortunately, even with that, it's wonderful to have a waterway where the ships can come all the way from the Atlantic to Duluth, but that allows predatory fish also to get all the way in. A sea lamprey is kind of like a snake with a mouth that looks like that. They'll latch onto the fish and just suck them dry. So these people at the fish hatchery are trying to restore the lake trout and also eradicate the sea lamprey.
It was time to leave the Upper Peninsula and to check out the east coast of Lake Michigan. Charlevoix is a lovely small town with a beautiful lighthouse. And it has a very nice new boardwalk so we could walk all around this quaint town. The first European explorers in this area were the French. Thus, the name is French, Charlevoix. And then there were Jesuit missionaries there. And this is a chapel and cemetery on the lake shore. It was founded by a French missionary, and he had a native wife. And this is from the 1700s. And this is another wonderful area in search for rocks. Charlevoix and nearby Petoskey sit on roughly a 4 million year old, it was a coral reef. And it's still possible to find fossilized coral here known as Petoskey rocks. And we have some examples here for you to take a look at. And Tom kind of ground it down and you can see the little coral in these rocks. It was also possible in Charlevoix to find dragons on rooftops. Charlevoix is an interesting town for another reason. We always visit the libraries wherever we go. And when this was an old high school and the town fathers wanted to convert them into high-rise condos, but the mothers of the town had a different idea. Now it's a fabulous library. And the top of this, where the stacks are, was a gymnasium, and it's all full of wood, and it's arched. It was beautiful. They had fanciful art, and this old classroom is now a peaceful reading room. And you can see here, these are little ducks that have clothes on them, and it's just they're fun little areas throughout this entire library. This is a brand new children's section. Driving through Charlevoix can be a bit of a challenge, though. Not only is it a quaint tourist town, but the main street is closed for any tall-masted ship that wants to get into the harbor. Walking around town, one encounters the Earl Young Local Historic District.
Mr. Young was a local, self-taught architect, and he built only using local materials and unique designs, creating mushroom houses. Quite unique designs, including this thatched roof home. A few years back, we visited this area and they were rethatching this home. It was also for sale at the time, and if I remember right, at that time, it was around $1.5 million in cost. We've never had the opportunity, but I certainly would enjoy seeing inside one of these homes.
And these homes were all over that town in one section, and they were so unique. And we went home and looked up Earl Young when we got back to the camper. What a genius. The guy really was talented. This is Sleeping Bear Dunes, and a small village within the park is another national lake shore that should not be missed if you're in this area. One of the locals that we met while hiking the Empire Bluff Trail was this beautiful hog-nosed snake. He's harmless, he's non-venomous, and his neck will swell up and his head swells up, so it scares you to death when you first see him, but he quietly maneuvered off into the woods, not interested in harming anyone. And the Empire Bluff Trail was a bit of a climb, but the view of Lake Michigan and Sleeping Bear Dune in the distance was magnificent. There's an area set aside for hiking and climbing the dunes, and it's more work than you might imagine. And the breeze was so strong that I wish I could have just spread my wings and flown in the air.
We didn't expect to find such beautiful flowers growing in the sand. And you can see how tiny most of them are due to the consistent windy conditions and very sandy soil. One morning, we got up very early to explore Sleeping Bear Point Beach. We wanted to beat the crowds. And except for a couple and their minister who were getting married in the dunes, we were the only ones. Problem was their dog and ours decided to strike up a conversation. So it added a little excitement to the ceremony.
It was quite humorous.
And the Savannah Sparrow in the dunes added music for the wedding.
And we beat the crowd, and we really didn't see many people on this trip, which was nice. And we went to the lake shore. And what was fascinating for me were the lovely patterns that the waves made in the sand overnight. It was like a painting. They were so beautiful. Further north in the park were two ghost towns, Glen Haven, which is an old canning museum, and the women used to work here at this canning museum. And an old gas station is now a gift shop. And here is a blacksmith shop where there were two volunteers working here. One of the gals was really quite talented. And the other ghost town was Glen Arbor, which is full of restaurants and boutiques.
Further north on the lake shore are two empty farmhouses, an abandoned school, and an outhouse. And that's all that remains of a once thriving town named Port Oneida. There were sweet peas growing around the houses that I thought were quite beautiful. As we were exploring these old homes, Tina was walking along the edge of the woods and said, "Oh, this looks like it might be an old trail down to the lake." And she and Kate disappeared into the woods. She was, of course, correct. At the end of the trail, we found this half-mile long, totally deserted beach. We found a lot of deserted beaches like that. So it's a nice thing about traveling late in the summer. Not a lot of people around. And here's the rest of the town, the old schoolhouse, and of course, the outhouse. A little further up the road is the Pyramid Point Trail, an interesting sign, especially the part about wearing brightly colored clothing, as it's always hunting season in Michigan.
And then we made it up to Pyramid Point to the very top, and the view was worth the effort. It may not look like much, but it was actually 20 stories down to the lake. And look how clean the water is that you can see here, the colors. And then we saw a lighthouse in the middle of the channel, and it was great for sailboats as well as large freighters. We had a wonderful bird's eye view of this turkey vulture who was actually flying below us. We also visited the ghost town of Arl. It's a bit south of Sleeping Bear, where the sign told us what the blue stuff in front of the car was. And Arl was another beautiful beach for wading and, of course, rock hunting or napping.
Some days are not quite so hospitable. This is that same beach at Arl 2 days later. If I were a surfer, I think there would be some possibilities here. In fact, just standing up straight was somewhat of a challenge. On a more peaceful day, we headed north to explore the Leilani Peninsula and the town of Leland and the Grand Traverse Lighthouse. Leland has been preserved as its historic fish town, and there is still a small commercial fleet here. We certainly think this is an appropriate windsock for Fish Town. And we had to find a place for lunch. Fish, of course.
And what was that? Walleye.
That was walleye.
Oh, was that yummy? And Carlson's Fisheries is still in operation. It's been in the family for 5 generations. So of course we had to go in there and get some smoked fish to snack on later. And this picture is an old ice house. This is really near and dear to me because my great-grandfather, paternal, and grandfather were once in the ice delivery business in St. Louis. And my mother would go down there when she'd see him and just pick up little ships of ice, you know, during the summer. And here is the Grand Traverse Lighthouse in the state park, which is open for tours and hiking on the beach, but of course you can't see that beautiful water that surrounds it. And also while exploring, we found some wild blackberries, and Kate checked them out and she gave us her seal of approval, and we certainly enjoyed munching on those. Many old farms dot the countryside, and they're just in great abundance. And here we saw a couple of sandhill cranes enjoying some fresh greens. Sandhills have a red hat, so to speak, a red head. It was just fun to enjoy them.
Now, further down on the lake is the Ludington North Breakwater Light. And it's interesting because it leans 4.5 degrees to the side. The concrete slab it was built on expanded due to the extreme cold, making the whole lighthouse tip a little bit. Ferries used to be the main mode of transportation across Lake Michigan, carrying both passengers and train cars. Now only one remains here in Ludington, Michigan. Quite a lot to see and do around Ludington, and we found the Marine Museum quite interesting. It's in an old Coast Guard boathouse. Tina got to play with an old ship's wheel. Well, I got to virtually bring a ferry into the harbor. Sadly, I crashed into the pier every time I tried it. As we left the museum, volunteers said they thought we held the record for the longest time anyone ever spent in their museum, because we tried everything.
And there were lots of birds feeding along the pier. This is a sanderling right here, and we could see its shadow. And then to the left is a plover, and he was searching for small water creatures. I had to inquire if these fishermen were having any luck, and so they were quite pleased to show me their recently caught very heavy lake salmon. I would have loved to follow them home for lunch. And here's a closer look at the Leaning Tower of Ludington.
Just north of the town of Ludington is the Ludington State Park. We were told there was an interesting lighthouse out on the beach. We didn't realize it would be a 1.8-mile walk in the sand both ways. Oh well. Once we got our first look at the lighthouse way in the distance there, we were glad we had made the walk. I think Kate enjoyed it also. The sand was pretty easy on her feet. The lighthouse on Big Sable Point is lovely. And in talking with volunteers here, we learned it was possible to volunteer and actually live in the keeper's house for several weeks at a time. We both think this might be a fun thing to do, so if you visit there in the next few years, we may be able to greet you and show you around the lighthouse. And of course, we had to climb. Tina got this great image of Lake Michigan shoreline from the top. South of Ludington is Little Sand Point Light. Tina and Kate look tiny beside this 112-foot tower. There used to be a lightkeeper's house here too at one time, but it was heavily damaged by vandals and had to be torn down.
Then it was Tom's time to climb, and I stayed back with the dog. And he took this image of this young Hispanic woman posing for a quinceañera picture. And I wish we knew who she was, because we have sent people pictures before and they've really had fun with them. And the beach in Lower Michigan was really soft sand. It was like flour, very unusual. I'm not buried. It's an optical illusion. And Kate was barking because that's what she does the best. And Ludington State Park also had kayaks to rent in a very well sheltered bay. So we got in a little bit of paddle time. And we both love to kayak, and we do that at Smithville Lake, which is near our home. And we thought Smithville was big, but boy, it's really not that big compared to these lakes. And I saw these shells scattered about in the water near the edge of the land, and I was surprised at how many varieties there were.
Here's a good place to mention that Michigan is also known for its fresh fruit and vegetables, as well as fish. Seems like every few miles, a local farmer would have a stand at the end of his drive with yummy peaches, apples, tomatoes, and other produce. In fact, one campground we stayed in had a stand like that. But at the end of the day, anything that was left, they brought to the campground and you could just help yourself. So we enjoyed lots of fresh vegetables and fruit.
That was fun, and I would be taking a walk and I'd see all these tomatoes, so I'd grab them and put them in my shirt and walk back. They were just delicious.
And of course, we had to get a picture of Ludington's Leaning Tower of Light at sunset. Sunset draws the biggest crowds everywhere we met, and you can see why. We then went a little further south along the lake to Grand Haven. So much to see and do along the lake. A month really isn't enough time to experience it all. I guess we'll have to go back. A friend of ours, Erica, used to work in the city of Gladstone, and we met her while volunteering at the Atkins Johnson Farm. Now she manages the Tri-City Historical Museum in Grand Haven. We visited her museum, had lunch, and she told us a lot more things to see and do in the area. One thing she advised us not to miss is the Hoffman Preserve, a 325-acre wetland preserve that has 4.5 miles of trails.
And early fall is a perfect time to enjoy this beautiful preserve. And they had this floating trail, and that's what we walked on throughout the wetlands. It's a boardwalk. And then here's just a little squirrel that we found hanging in the tree. And we enjoyed walking through these woods, and we were the only one there. It was very, very peaceful.
And of course, Tina had to try a little bit of trail maintenance as we were walking.
Anyway, there were lots of beautiful wetland blooms again. And occasionally an egret would pop their head out and check on our progress. And this is a little difficult to see here, but this is a lovely black-throated green warbler, and it did its best to hide from us. And Grand Haven has a beautiful lighthouse also. The metal scaffolding that you can see here is for the keepers to reach the light when the waves are so high that it, washes over them, this concrete. And or if it's buried in ice. It was somewhat wavy that evening, but there were two guys out there surfing, and it was fun to watch them. They never could stand up, but you got to give them credit for trying. And here's another completely gorgeous sunset. It was interesting to stay, and even after the sun dipped down into the horizon, the colors changed. Some locals told us, stay 30 minutes after it dips down. The sky was pink, purple, and blue, real light blue. It was amazing.
We moved on then to South Haven. Lots of towns who are named Haven along this side of the Lake Michigan. South Haven is another quaint lakeside village, and of course with another beautiful lighthouse.
I really enjoyed watching the fishermen because they were so interesting to me on South Haven. My father was a fisherman, and so were several of my uncles. There were lots of $100 million fishing boats, but also folks who enjoyed fishing without any flashy extras. And one could even go fishing on the salmonella, but just don't catch anything. And he was fun to watch, this little guy, just starting out. And this fellow looked like he'd been at it for a long time. And here's some fishers with feathers. These were two lovely cormorants who were preening in this area. And then when the lights came on in the evening, the pier and lights became even more interesting.
Our next stop was in St. Joseph, Michigan. You've seen lighthouses in our pictures in several different colors, from dark, black and white, red and white, all white. There's a lot of disagreement as to which color can be seen best from the water. St. Joseph chose white.
Too fun.
Thank you. And we had two lighthouses on the same pier, along with a bad weather scaffolding. Whatever the color, they are quite beautiful at sunset. One thing we saw more than once was young people having their senior pictures taken at the shoreline. Imagine buying a new dress, getting all fixed up, then going and dipping in the cold Lake Michigan just to get a picture. Sounded kind of crazy to us, but we saw lots of people doing it.
And you come home full of sand. Didn't make any sense to me.
On a river near a campground, we met this man who made his own canoes. And this looks like a very interesting place to canoe or kayak.
This was an interesting place. We were driving. I said, oh, please stop. I need to get a picture of this. This was built in 1893. It's a women's reading circle named after Sir Walter Scott. And they built this clubhouse in St. Joseph, Michigan. This beautiful building caught my eye. Even though the clock said it was 12:20, Kate and Tom decided to take a nap. And the next morning was a little bit rainy, and we decided to go to the museum, a good day for that. In St. Joseph, this is the Michigan Maritime Museum. It's a really nice museum, but we found the most interesting exhibit to be the Friendship Goodwill. It was a rebuilt ship from the War of 1812. It was captured, burned, but not destroyed by the British. And it was rebuilt for shipping after the war. And the ship does take excursions out on the lake, but because it was rainy, they didn't go out, unfortunately. This I found absolutely fascinating. This is 1812 technology. It's a prism built into the ceiling of an interior, and they would have a desk here where they would put their maps, for reading. And this prism, even though it was very gray out, really lit up that table. I think that's quite unique.
We then moved on and stopped in Springfield, Illinois on our way home. We wanted to visit a friend who lived there. And he recommended visiting the Illinois Audubon Society, which is in this farm, which is right in the middle of Springfield. The grounds were full of lovely blooms, butterflies, and a nuthatch. He also recommended visiting the Lincoln Memorial Gardens. Since we previously visited all the Abraham Lincoln sites in Springfield, and they are all wonderful, the library is fascinating, but we found this garden to be a delight. Gardens were interspersed with benches containing Abraham Lincoln quotes, as well as installations like this made totally of recycled materials.
Our last stop on the trip was Hannibal, Missouri, and we've enjoyed visiting Hannibal before. And we found some new things. This was a new winery on the campground. And this was Cameron Cave. This was a newly opened cave. They already had one there, and so we decided to go into this cave since we had seen the last one.
And as Tina entered this 18-inch high and 22-foot long hole in the cave, I wondered, maybe I'll be driving home alone. She was the brave one. In fact, on the trip, there were 2 women on the tour. They were the only ones who would go through this.
But the guide was guiding us through, he went in first. And it was so warm in there, we had a lot of clothes on because it was cold in the cave. And I was so overheated because there's hardly any air. But I was like a caterpillar crawling through that thing, but I made it.
While traveling, we keep our eyes and ears open for unexpected finds. In Hannibal, the LST-325, that's landing ship tank, it is the only surviving LST from over 1,000 produced during World War II. It was docked in town for the weekend. Since both of our fathers were World War II veterans, we found this ship wonderfully interesting. I think Tina was ready to enlist, or after a little training, anxious to fire on any invaders from across the river in Illinois.
But instead, I just decided to model one of my idols, Rosie Riveter. And I bought this shirt in the gift shop in that boat. It was a fascinating boat. I have some books here if you want to look at it. It's absolutely fascinating. They found this in Greece. It was in terrible shape. They hunted for years, and they found it and they sailed it back. And now it's being moved around. It's very interesting. And it was at Hannibal. It's well worth going up there to see it. And then we really enjoy the murals in Hannibal. They had quite a few murals.
Now, Missouri skies are always beautiful, and our state provided this beautiful welcome home. Thanks for your attention. We're happy to answer any questions or provide any additional information if you'd like. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your attention.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, folks.